this is one that at times can be a challenge. If your rotation is only corn and soybeans, I understand it's a challenge. Sometimes we have to shorten the maturity dates on what we're seeding, planting as a cash crop, in order to give us a large enough window of time to get a cover crop established. And I know what some people are saying, oh, but that's going to negatively affect my yield. Folks, I don't care about yield, I care about profitability. There's a huge difference between the two. I will take profit over yield any day. Profit gives you the opportunity to stay on your farm or ranch. Yield may not. Okay? Never pass up the opportunity to cycle carbon and feed biology. In the foreground here, I had combined off a cash crop. Then I went in there with simply bin run oats, bin run peas, and 2 pounds of daikon radish. Not a very diverse mix, but my goal was simply to cycle carbon for as long as I could throughout the year. This photo was taken in October, about 7th of October. Not this past year, but a few years back. Okay? I can keep these cool season species growing up until temperatures get down to below 15 degrees, 10, 12 degrees for 3 nights in a row. Then we're going to lose them. That's usually getting close to Thanksgiving. Okay? If I would have just left that and not seeded anything there from August on, look at all the carbon and all the nutrients that I'm not taking advantage of. Look at the length of time that biology in my soil is not being fed. That's directly affecting my profitability. Now, since I'm on this slide, I want to talk about one other thing. See that in the background there? That's a warm season cover crop. That's brown midrib sorghum Sudan and a bunch of other species I'll talk more about coming up. When this was taken, this photo, October 7th, I'm sure we had froze many, many times. Does that Sudan grass looks like it's frozen? I can keep sorghum Sudan grass growing down to about 27 degrees or so, then it's going to terminate. You see, as you advance soil health, it buffers frost. And it absolutely amazes me. Think of the amount of solar energy I've been able to still collect in that. Okay? This is a closer look of that oat pea radish mix. I'm collecting solar energy, feeding biology. I really like this comic, and so the old rancher says to the vet, and then suddenly this morning she didn't look so good. I saw that and I just had to copy it because in my mind, that's what I think of when I think of the soils all over the world. You know, farmers and ranchers tend to not realize. As I said earlier, I hear over and over and over again how, Gabe, you don't understand, our soils aren't like that. Well, do you understand you can change that? If they're not what you want, that's directly on you. And you have the ability, through your management, to change that. And one of the ways to do that is with cover crops. We need to use cover crops to address our resource concerns. Now, these resource concerns are going to be different on my ranch as compared to your farm. And they're different from field to field. They can be. One of my pet peeves is when I get a phone call, and let me give you an example of that. So my phone rang last March. Gentleman on the other end says, "You're that cover crop guy." And I said, "Well, I've been called worse. What can I do?" He says, "I planted a cover crop and I'm not too happy." I said, "Okay, tell me about it." South Central South Dakota, irrigated land, grew winter wheat, combined off the winter wheat, baled off the straw, seeded it to radish and turnips, turned on the sprinkler, got a good catch, good growth, turned his coward on there for the winter, and I interrupted him then. And I said, let me guess. Now here it is March, and your fields are starting to blow. Well, yeah, he said, the cover crop didn't work. I said, no, cover crop worked exactly as it should have. You're the one who failed to plant. You see, he planted radishes and turnips. What are radishes and turnips? They're brassicas, they're nitrogen accumulators. They will scavenge and suck up excess nitrogen. After that wheat crop, any wheat crop's going to have some excess residual N in the field. He baled off all the straw. There went carbon. Soil is 11 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. I showed you the mineralization. That bacteria, 5 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen, right? Okay, he baled off carbon. Then he planted the brassicas. The cattle grazed off the above ground biomass, the carbon. Well, those tubers, radishes and turnips, sucked up all that nitrogen. The minute they start warming up in the spring, they start releasing that nitrogen. That biology goes, great, I'm eating nitrogen. For every 1 part nitrogen, it needs at least 5 parts carbon. Where's it going to get the carbon? He baled everything off, grazed it off. It's going to get carbon from the soil aggregates, from the organic matter in the soil. Once that's consumed, it starts blowing away. He put the wrong cover crop on there. He should have planted oats, barley, something like that to scavenge and hold that nitrate nitrogen. That's what he should have done. And then, obviously, not grazed it so far. It's my pet peeve when I get people calling and saying, well, I put this cover crop mix in. Did it address your resource concern? What is your resource concern? Well, I don't know. The cover crop seed salesman sold it to me. Folks, if you call a cover crop seed salesperson, they should ask you your name, your location, and what's your resource concern. If they don't ask you that, hang up on them. They're just trying to make money off you. Okay? Every field's going to have a little different resource concern. Now, I would contend that we should all focus somewhat on carbon and biology, because we need to cycle more carbon back into our soils. We all have degraded soils, depleted of carbon, unless you're on peat soils. The other thing is we need to feed biology. But then what else are you trying to do? Do you need more armor? Do you got to build soil aggregates? Do you want to increase mycorrhizal fungi? There's species that are better than others at that. You got salinity issues? You're trying to feed wildlife? Trying to feed livestock? What are you trying to do? Once you determine your resource concern, then you can design a cover crop mix. Okay? But you have to do some planning. Cover crops rarely fail. We just fail to plant, is usually the problem. So this is a warm season mix that I was seeding, and I took a picture of it. What do you notice about this picture? Go ahead and just shout it out. There's many different things. What do you notice about it?
Different seed size.
Seed size, difference, yes. Always get asked that one. How do you seed with that many different seed sizes? Open it up so the largest seed can flow through, set it on middle notch and go. It's pretty simple, you know. Okay, that's one thing. What else? What else do you hear? What else do you see? Diversity, that's right. There's grasses and forbs and legumes in there, and I'll talk about that. I'm looking for one specific thing. Now, those of you who have attended the last few days, oh, is it dead? Let's see. Okay, he's going to change batteries for me if I can ask him to. I will, I'll just ask this. I can raise my voice. My children were teenagers once. Those of you who attended before, don't shout the answer out. But I'm looking for one specific thing. There's one thing that we should notice in this picture. There's a book riding on it. So those of you who don't read, don't. No. Okay. What?
There's diversity.
There is diversity. That's one thing. Not what I'm looking for, though. Anybody else? Come on, students. You're smart. I know you are. Way in back.
Radish or turnips?
There's radish, there is brassicas in there, yes.
Cool season and warm season.
There's cool, well, yes there is. That is one, but not what I'm looking for.
It's untreated.
Bingo, who said that? Here you go. Yeah, you get a book. And I did this little exercise for a few reasons. One is I really think farmers, ranchers have lost some of the ability to observe. Okay. There we go. It's untreated. Okay? I realize a lot of you in this room are corn and soybean farmers. Do you treat your corn and soybean seed? Yes, you'll say, most of you. Now, when your seed salesman is selling you that seed, has he or she ever explained the rhizophagy cycle? Okay? I didn't think so. Dr. James White discovered this rhizophagy cycle. What he discovered, this is the root tip of a plant. I showed the pictures how this plant sends out all that carbon to attract biology. What Dr. White discovered is the biology, all these microbes, actually enter inside the root tip of the plant. Once they're inside, the nutrients from that biology are sucked out by the plant. So now, any of you who thought you were a vegetarian, I just love that. I can't resist saying that. Plants are consuming the nutrients out of the biology. Once they have, they move that biology up and then out the root hairs of the plant. This is the root hair. This is the main root of the plant. That's a root hair. All this cloudy material is biology being expelled out of the root hair to go collect more nutrients. Okay? Now, what's even more amazing than that is Dr. White and his team discovered that during the reproductive phase of the plant, that plant has the ability to move that microbiology up and put it on the seed. Why? So the biology is there when that seed goes and germinates. What do we do in our infinite wisdom? We treat the seed. What are we really doing? Tony.
Okay, a quick question on that. If it's taking care of the seed itself, what about the underground network of roots? Wouldn't they share that and help that seed initially start growing the same way?
But the underground network, mycorrhizal fungi, will share nutrients, but not the specific biology. Okay? The biology doesn't flow through mycorrhizal fungi, the nutrients do. So you have to have the biology to bring the nutrients. Okay? See, now, isn't that just arrogant of mankind to think we know better? To think we're smarter than nature? Right? Think of that when you're putting treated seed in. You're killing the very biology that your profitability depends on. Yes?
If the seed that you're buying is raised on a farm that is using treated seed, does that seed not have biology in it?
The question was, if the seed you're buying was raised on a farm that uses treated seed, and I will take that one step further, that does not use these regenerative practices, you're absolutely right, it will not have the biology. Now, it'll have some because there's biology in all soils. Okay? But Tony and I were talking earlier about how many of the new hybrids being released today do not have the ability to form these associations with mycorrhizal fungi. Dr. Wendy Tahari, she's one of the world's premier experts in mycorrhizal fungi, has a whole lab where she takes seed and determines if it's mycorrhizal compatible. She said the vast majority of corn species, full 50% of other species being developed today, do not have that ability. Why? Because of how it's grown and developed. Yes?
On this mycorrhizal fungi, in order for that to grow, don't you have a living plant? If you have a year where nothing gets grown,
Oh.
is everything gone?
Is everything gone? No, it's sporulates. Any of biology, it's just like, take my ranch for instance, we're 6 years extremely dry, especially the last 2. The biology is just more or less hibernating. Let's use that for ease of conversation. It sporulates and it's there. The fungi sporulate, those spores are laying there, waiting for the right amount of moisture, and then they'll take off. It's kind of like this. Think of seed. We've all heard about wild oats can lay 100 years, and then all of a sudden it'll germinate. That's why, we seem to be infatuated with weeds, and we think, oh, we got to do all this to kill all these different weeds. You'll never deplete the seed bank of weeds that's in the soil. It's not going to happen, right? So why are we so focused on meaningless things? Well, you will never kill all the biology either, because it's laying there, ready to take off. The key is, how do we proliferate it to where we can put more dollars in it? Good question.
I planted corn, same variety, U.S. grown, South American grown, when they ran out of crop, seed. That biology is different down there. The corn just don't seem to wake up until 3 weeks later it finally shows the thing. It's biology.
Well, and I'll just say this, and I, realize I was a Pioneer seed dealer for years in a previous life, okay? But I wasn't, it got to the point where I wasn't growing Pioneer seed on my own farm anymore, and I just couldn't do it anymore. But fact of the matter is, all of the pictures I've shown you, the barley, the oats, the rye, the triticale, the vetch, even my corn, it's all seed that I've kept from my own operation. Most of the seed I'm planting now, I've been propagating for 20 to 25 years. And I just keep back the same seed. And people say, oh, but you need this disease resistance. Why? My plants, if I'm in healthy soil, they're not getting sick, so. I really think we need to be doing more of that as farmers and ranchers, sourcing our own seed. Not to put seed dealers out of business, I'm just saying. Tell Keith Burns that next week when he's over. Keith and I are friends, he'd get a good laugh. Tell him Gabe says we should be keeping all, he'll love that. I'll get a phone call, that's all right. Okay, why diverse cover crop mixes? If soil health is the goal, crop diversity cannot be ignored or overstated. Plants were created to grow in diverse ecosystems. We've shown that. Walk out in the prairie, walk in the forest. Wants diversity. Resiliency comes from diversity, and I showed you that. It's those pipelines of those mycorrhizal fungi. A single fungi can easily cover 1,000 acres. I kind of laugh at today's technology. We need this precise fertilizer placement. Really? A fungi can take nutrients from one end of the field and move it to the other. Why do we want to spend the money? Okay. Balanced diet for soil biology. The more diversity, the more different root exudates, the more nutrients you're going to cycle. That leads to a balanced diet for biology. And balance because even good things like legumes and brassicas, when not used in moderate balance, can be harmful. I told you the example of the South Dakota producer in the brassicas. Some of the poorest fields we measure for soil health every year, monoculture alfalfa and monoculture soybeans. Those are the poorest, especially you get into alfalfa that's been in a number of years. All the carbon's been taken off. The soil is like a rock. Infiltration is poor. There's no place for monoculture alfalfa. Generally speaking, the more specific your goals or concerns, the less diverse your mixes will be. For example, if you're using a cover crop mix to address pest nematode issues, and most nematodes are good, only a few are pests, then you're going to be stronger in brassicas because they act as a nematicide, okay? So if you have a wide range of resource concerns, you're going to have a more diverse mix. And then, generally speaking, the tighter your planting window, how many days do I have? And on my ranch, I've found if I have 35 or 40 days, I'm going to plant a cover crop before the next cash crop. I'm going to try and get a cover crop grown. Because even in that time, it may not get very tall, but it more than pays in what it's doing. But we're not going to plant a very diverse mix in those cases. So I showed you back here, that mix right there is this right here. Now, don't pay attention to what I grow on my ranch. It may or may not work on yours. All I'm trying to get across to you is every species in this mix is in there for a specific reason. Sorghum sedangras. If you want to pump carbon into your soils, that's one of the best things. And my next slide will show that. There's been studies done, if you graze sorghum sedangras during the growing season and then have adequate moisture, you can triple root biomass growth. 2/3 of our organic matter increase approximately comes from roots. You want to add roots, graze it during the growing season. Millets, very fibrous root systems. Hybrid pearl millet. Hybrid pearl millet can grow well on only 2 inches of moisture. We put that in the mix because I'm in a dry environment. I've got a bunch of different brassicas in here. Notice I have soybeans. I do not grow soybeans as a cash crop. Why? Our rain usually shuts off by the 4th of July and we don't see moisture until snow flies. I have a neighbor who has took over renting the section of ground west of me about 12 years ago. Plants half it soybeans, half corn, just switches. Thinks he's an Iowa, you know? How many soybeans crops has he combined in 12 years? 1. That's why I don't plant soybeans. We just don't get the rain that's needed. But I do put some in my warm season mix because I can get some growth and it adds diversity. Cowpeas, hairy vetch, fava beans. Now you might say, boy, you got a lot of legumes in this mix. What do you think the percentage of legumes are in a native ecosystem? Any guess? If you went out and counted all the different plant species, about what percentage in a healthy ecosystem are legumes?
25.
25. Anybody else want to guess?
Pushing 40.
40. 70. Woofda. The answer is certainly less than 10. Somewhere between 5 and 10%. 10 would be on the high end, though. You see what the difference is. We think a lot of legumes are needed because we're focusing on yield. Natural ecosystems focus on long-term sustainability. Carbon-nitrogen ratios. I told you, soil, 1 part nitrogen, 11 parts carbon. So grasses and forbs comprise 90+% of the species in an ecosystem. It's only mankind who screws it up by going the other way. Also, we got to realize in a healthy ecosystem, there's species such as azotobacter. They're free-living bacteria that can take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil. We need to rely on things like that. Now, am I standing here telling you to quit applying nitrogen? No, you're going to have a wreck. However, we need to back off and apply it appropriately. So, even though this might look like I have a lot of legumes, there's very little compared to the plants, number of plants per acre of these other species. This is actually the smallest component in the mix. Sunflowers are in the mix because they have a very deep taproot and they can do well in dry conditions. Safflower. You know what safflower is? It looks like a thistle. Why would I plant safflower? Armor. That's one reason. You're correct. Good job. The other reason is about a third of my annual moisture comes from snow. I need to have something standing out in that field after grazing to collect snow. So we put safflower in the mix. Buckwheat cycles phosphorus. Flax, highly mycorrhizal. There's my brassicas, turnip and radish to suck up this nitrate nitrogen. Phacelia, very, very dense root biomass, and it attracts pollinators. Plantain. Plantain is a natural ancominthic. We haven't had to worm livestock for 12 years now. No reason, they just eat the forbs and they're wormed. Not a problem. So, everything in here serves a purpose, addresses a resource concern. Would I start you off with mixes like this diverse? No. But as you advance soil health, then you're going to see the need for increased diversity. Yes?
Gabe, when we started doing the cover crops, because it is degraded, we've added more legumes in the beginning and dropped them out. Is that?
And thank you for bringing that up. The question was, they've added more legumes in the beginning as they move down this path and then drop them out. Yes, that's exactly the right thing to do. And the reason is you have to feed as much biology as possible early on, so you want the lower carbon to nitrogen ratio to stimulate that biology early on to proliferate. Then, as your nutrient cycling, as your biology builds, you will want to slow that down. That's exactly the right thing to do. Yep. Very good. Good point. All this is shown here is that different plant species pump different amounts of that liquid carbon into the soil. This depicts a flax plant, sorghum plant, flax plant, sorghum plant. See, a flax plant, in proportion for growth, takes up a higher percentage of nitrogen and phosphorus. It only pumps about 30% of those carbon compounds into the soil. Look at the sorghum plant. In proportion, takes up very little nitrogen and phosphorus, but a full 70% of the carbon compounds that it brings in through photosynthesis, it pumps into the soil. So, if one of your resource concerns is lack of carbon in the soil, sorghum sudan-based cover is really good. And as is above, so is below. How many of us as farmers and ranchers pay attention to the different root types? Do we have fibrous roots, tap roots, shallow, medium, deep? One of the most enjoyable things is go to a field day where they've dug a soils pit. Do not allow that on your own farm, but dig a soils pit in a very diverse cover crop and look at the different root types. It's absolutely amazing. You can find annual plants with roots 8 to 10 feet deep in a healthy soil. Think of the nutrients that are being cycled. Think of all that carbon being brought in, and this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about carbon sequestration. Think of that. You see, roots build organic matter and cycle nutrients. I really like this photo. This is an intermediate wheatgrass plant. Right there is where the soil surface was. Look at that root biomass. That's just amazing. I can't imagine how many thousands of miles of roots there are here. There's a lot. Here shows the difference. Perennial grass, this is kind of hard to see, but look at how solid this is with roots, and annual grass. This is the problem in agriculture. We go to all annuals, and then we wonder why our soils are degraded. We need to get some perennials back into the rotation, and that can't be straight alfalfa. Straight alfalfa, you're not going to build organic matter, okay? Yes?
The sort of Sudan grass pumps 70% of carbon back in the soil. Any idea what all the perennial grasses might do?
That will depend if they're cool or warm season. their growing season, but many of those perennials will be in the 50 to 70% range.
Even the cool season.
Even the cool seasons will be much higher. And that's simply because perennials will have a much greater root biomass. Yep. Much, much greater. Excellent question. Okay, resource concern, nutrients. What are the requirements of the next cash crop? Okay? What do I see over and over again with clients? What's the number one nutrient that they purchase? Nitrogen, right? Ask you, next time your agronomist wants to sell you nitrogen, ask him this. Well, there's approximately 32,000 tons of atmospheric nitrogen above every surface acre. Why don't I just use some of that? See what they say. Now, I get in a lot of trouble and people get offended when I say this, but I'm just going to say it anyway because frankly I don't care. Okay? Why would any farmer want to buy synthetic nitrogen when there's 32,000 tons above it? All it is a matter of is diversifying the crop rotation, providing a home for all those free-living nitrogen fixers like azotobacter. I haven't bought a pound since 2007, yet I'm still farming profitably. Anybody can do it. All it is planting the right species. This is just rhizobium on a legume root. Taking that atmospheric nitrogen and putting it into the soil. Legumes can fix a lot of nitrogen. Look at, here's some of the commonly used legumes. This is pounds of nitrogen per acre. Now that's if it was a monoculture. We're not going to recommend monocultures, but look at the amount of nitrogen that you can get out of that. And we need much less nitrogen than we used to think we need. And I'll show that coming up this afternoon. This all started for me, of course, back when I was going through those years of hail and drought. In 1998, our last year of hail, we had a hailstorm in late June. I scraped enough money together to buy some Sudan grass and cowpea seed, a grass and a legume. Why would anyone grow a grass plant without a legume? Put it in there. And as the story goes, I literally did not have the money to buy twine and the fuel to cut this for hay, so I just let it go, turned my cattle in there, ran a hot wire, turned them in there, and that's how we wintered our cows that year. Since then, I just put up very little hay. We put up some, we're in a northern environment. But like last year, for instance, 2020, we fed hay 18 days to 800 head of cattle. That's it. Other than that, they're out there grazing. Now this year, we had to start feeding in January. But most years, I can get by with about 45 days of feeding. Other than that, they're out there grazing. Cattle have 4 legs for a reason. Okay, I often hear this from people starting down the regenerative path. We have to go till because my soils are too cold. I hear that over and over again. This is a friend of mine, Glenn, lives north of me. Glenn started no-tilling in the late 90s. He called me up 5 years later. Gabe, I got to go back to tillage. Soils are too cold. So drove up there, took this picture. You can see every crop Glenn planted the previous 5 years. Corn, sunflowers, winter wheat, spring wheat, barley. What do all those have in common? Carbon, that's right. Very good. You're catching on. I like it. I like it. They're high carbon crops. Glenn, you don't have a residue problem. You have a carbon nitrogen ratio problem. You have too high a carbon, not enough nitrogen. So Glenn, immediately following wheat harvest, went in there with peas and 2 pounds of daikon radish. The peas, through rhizobia, fixed nitrogen. The radishes sucked it up. What happens the next spring? Those bulbs break down. There goes his residue. Now he added peas to his rotation. No more residue problems. Now he's going the other way. removing, as we talked about, removing some of the legumes because this soil is healthy enough to cycle it through. This isn't rocket science, it's simply how soil functions. Here's another one for you. Global increase in herbicide-resistant cases. In other words, herbicide-resistant weeds. Okay? What do we see? You hear about it all the time. We can use cover crops for weed suppression. This is my ranch. Planted a cover crop here the fall before, and we winter grazed it. I did not, shame on me, have a cover crop here. Look at the difference the following spring. I'm going to be able to go in and have a cash crop there with 0 herbicide. I'm going to need to use a herbicide here. Yes? Yeah, cover crops on hilly land to stop erosion. Absolutely, good point. This gentleman had a pea crop on both sides of this tree row the previous year. Planted a cover crop here, grazed it with livestock, sprayed this side the previous fall, no cover crop. Look at the next spring. Not going to need a herbicide there. He's going to have to use a herbicide here. Profit, 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 cost, cost, cost. Oh, I don't have time to plant a cover crop. No, but you got time to do multiple herbicide passes. Right? This is just a close-up of one of my warm season mixes, grazed during the winter by livestock. Then the following spring, I go right in there and seed. That's my herbicide program. Last year, I've got a 6,000 acre ranch, approximately 2,000 acres of farm ground. Do you want to know my total herbicide bill? $19.95. There was one patch of Canada thistle by the mailbox. I got tired of the wife nagging at me. This is me planting corn into that residue. I put this picture to show you. This is just an old corn planter, but it works. No trash whippers. That's way too much tillage. Why would I want to move that residue? Here it is. I plant corn between May 15th and 20th. Corn is a warm season grass. It needs 55-degree soil temps to germinate. I don't know why everyone is in such a race to put it in when the ground's cold. So that field there is planted. Now watch this. So this is late May. There is June 16th. There's July 1st. What's happening to all that residue? What happened to that?
Gabe, you're not planting green?
I'm not planting green. At times we do. But if I have that much residue from a cover crop, that is my weed control. Okay? Because we're grazing these covers in the winter. So we'll be grazing these when there's 20 to 30 inches of snow on the ground. I'm not going to be able to plant anything in December, January.
For your winter,
Context. Yeah.
for your winter grazing, are you still rotating them, or are you
Yeah.
expanding your rotation?
Yeah.
No more days.
Yeah. And the question is, during the winter, we're not moving daily, but they are getting moved at least once a week.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And at least that's what my son tells me. I'm not home. So he's going to do what he wants. It's his ranch. Okay? So look at the residue disappearing. And these photos were from 2009, by the way. But I'm really embarrassed to this one. That was after harvest on that field. I never want anybody seeing bare soil on my ranch. And since then, they're not seeing bare soil on my ranch. But the reason it's bare is right here. All the biology, cycling nutrients. Now there's many different species we can use for weed suppression. These, I've just listed a few of them here. You know, use them in combination, but be careful according to your crop rotation, herbicides, etc. Pay attention to that. I put this one in there, species used to attract beneficial insects. Because I just can't figure out why we're so enamored with spraying pesticides. All you gotta do is provide the home and habitat for the beneficials, and you won't have a problem with those predators. Now, I do want to tell you, it's not gonna happen overnight. But how many of us got an odd-shaped corner that we cuss every year because we try and get the drill backed around to get it, or the planter to get it planted? Why not put that into a perennial mix to attract pollinators and predators? Instead, we cuss that every year and then we go spray insecticides, right? This is a cool season cover crop mix. Now, rarely do I put up mixes in the pounds of each, but I did here because I want to show you that there doesn't have to be 20 species in a mix. But look, I have grasses in here, I have legumes in here, I have broadleaves in here. I've got 3 functional groups in there, right? I've got some species diversity. That just works. If you're a dairyman or a beef person or a sheep person, you want a diverse diet for livestock, this works really well. Yes?
I was gonna say one of the advantages of livestock, eating the cover crop also in the winter and fall, we're obviously, we should help with natural fertilization.
Absolutely. Cover livestock integrated onto cropland. You will benefit soil health. You're absolutely right. Nice thing about it is you can go in with a real early cool season mix like this, then follow it up with a warm season mix. So this is that mix right there. You see, I've got a few legumes, I've got grasses, we've got brassicas in there, we've got broadleaves in there. Look at the amount of solar energy we're collecting there. The final principle, animal integration. Our soils were formed with large herds of bison and elk moving across. Even here in Wisconsin, they were here, being moved by predators, grazing, trampling, defecating, then they'd come back much later, maybe a year or 2 later. And as I showed this morning, we've removed the animals from the landscape, put them into lots, and we removed much of the biomass. Ecosystems do not function properly without animals and insects. Plain and simple. I get often asked, Gabe, can we use these principles to drive the processes if we do not have livestock? I said, yes, absolutely. Of the 30 million acres we're consulting on, over 12 million of that is on straight row crop farms that do not run livestock. We can significantly advance soil health and increase profitability, but make no mistake about it. Your soils will never be to the point they would be if you integrate livestock. Plain and simple. So on our ranch, we have that herd of cows. We raise grass-fed, grass-finished beef. We have a flock of ewes and grass-finished lambs, about 150 head of them a year. We farrow out sows outside and raise 300 to 400 pastured finishing pork. Now they are on grain also. And then we have about 1,400 land hens out on pasture for the majority of the year. During the winter, they are in a hoop house. We also have broilers, turkeys, occasionally ducks. We got bees, a myriad of other species. And our chickens are free to roam. They can fly to Wisconsin if they so choose. We're limited to the amount of hens that we run by my wife's desire to clean eggs. Okay? She'll clean 1,000 eggs a day plus during spring, summer, and fall. So we try and give the gal a break because I don't want her to leave. Okay? But what this is, it's created a very, very healthy soil ecosystem. I'm not saying we're perfect. I have no idea where. I'm sure my son will take it much, much further than I ever did. That's my soil on the left I'm holding, that's my neighbor's no-till soil on the right. Your management makes the difference. This is the same soil type, it's just feet apart. That's all management. So, in 1993, we started with about 3 inches of A horizon topsoil, 1.7 to 1.9% organic matter, half of an inch of rainfall infiltration per hour. During those disaster years, I started to diversify the crop rotation. Slight bump in organic matter. Then we started integrating more cover crops, major improvement. This all didn't happen in 1 year, it was kind of a progression. Then we went to multi-species covers, extended the growing season. When we started integrating livestock on the cropland, we noticed huge differences. And now, today, we've moved organic matter levels 5.3 to near 8%. Dr. John Norman, who's a world-renowned soil scientist, has measured infiltration at over 30 inches per hour on our soils. As I said, we never get 30 inches of moisture in a year. So that makes me very resilient. We're going to be able to infiltrate water and then move throughout the soil profile. So how much time do I have? I really don't want to start. Is there questions? Let's take questions for a little bit now. Yes, ma'am.
If you had it to do over, which year would you integrate livestock?
If I had to do it over again, oh man, what I wouldn't do. There are people out there now that they just get it. Gabe's pretty slow and lazy and I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. We deal with farmers all the time. You can't be mad at the farmers. They don't know. Nobody's teaching them these things. But there's people now who move their ecosystems further in 5 years than I did in 20 years. But I would start integrating livestock as soon as it fits my context. Okay? And the reason is we can just advance things faster. Why? Grazing those multi-species covers just adds so much to the energy cycle, the water cycle, and the nutrient cycle. You'll just speed up recovery. However, if financially you're not able to, or maybe starting out you have an off-farm job and you're moving in slowly, we're not going to push you to get livestock then starting out. You have to work within your own context. Okay? Yes?
Could you touch on it and explain, by grazing the livestock, a lot of people think they're taking a lot off the ground.
Yeah.
Mine, the livestock is 75% water.
Yeah.
You're
absolutely right. That's a great point. For an average cow, per day, an average cow craps out 1/4 pound of nitrogen, 0.15 pounds of phos, and 1/2 pound of potassium every day. Look at the amount of nutrients. If you do a good job and high enough stock densities, look at the amount of nutrients you're cycling. And then I often get asked the question, well, if I apply manure, am I doing the same thing? No, much of that nitrogen is volatilized off. The phosphorus will be there, much of the potassium will be there, but a lot of the nitrogen is volatilized off. And the other missing component is the live biology itself. When an animal dumps, there's a lot of biology in that crap, okay? And that biology works in the soil too. Yes?
You talked about if you had 30 days, you see the cover crop.
Mm-hmm.
How much, let's say in Wisconsin, how much money would you spend on cover crop?
Yep. And I actually said 35 to 40, but not to be picky. But yes, that's where you're the tighter the planting window, the less diverse it'll be. So if I only had 35 to 40 days, I'm going to go in there with, now it depends what species following, depends herbicides, etc. I'm going to go in with species such as barley, very fast growing, oats, buckwheat, because those will germinate and get going and very, very quickly. You take buckwheat, You can have viable seed in 40 days with buckwheat, and you'll get very good ground cover with it. But you gotta be careful, what am I putting in next? You know, I wouldn't wanna put buckwheat ahead of soybeans, because if you get some volunteer seed, it could become an issue the following year. Okay?
Not necessarily a bad thing, you got a diverse mix, just separate it out.
Yeah, and you can certainly do that. You can certainly do that. There are some research farms in Canada now. Polyculture cash crop is a big thing in parts of Canada, and they're finding 20 to 60% higher net returns per acre when they plant a polyculture versus a cash crop. And they're going with species such as canola and flax, canola and peas, chickpeas and flax, 2 to 3 different species in the mix. And there's actually 2 manufacturing companies up there that have built the equipment. Obviously, you have to have a little difference in seed size and weight of that seed. And that equipment can separate the seed almost as fast as you can unload an auger. It's pretty amazing. Yes?
What's your opinion on rye and barley, rye and barley for crop?
Rye and barley, well, you're talking 2 different seasons unless you have a winter barley, you know? So it's 2 different seasons, but there's certainly a place for them. Rye is a fantastic cover, especially in front of soybeans. There's a question here, yes?
Do your soils, or does your diversity regulate your pH, or is that something you have to pay attention to?
Yeah, pH, do I pay attention to pH? Here's a little known fact that most salesmen will not tell you. Plants have the ability to regulate pH along the rhizosphere, in other words, along that root. They can actually regulate the pH. Now, pH is a problem if we get way off on the ends. But out of 30 million acres that we consult on, only 3 clients have we had to go recommend lime to. It's just very, very rare. What's usually happening is changing these things is an over-application of nitrogen. That nitrogen then is binding to the calcium, and because that nitrogen is water soluble, it's pulling the calcium deeper down in the soil profile. So if we go with more diverse plant roots, we're able to cycle that back. So do we look at pH? Yes, but it's rare we have to do anything. Now, there are, you get way off, you know, you get a salinity issue, we'll start growing species that are more salt tolerant because you got to cycle it through, okay? So we pay attention, but we ask ourselves, okay, how can nature solve this rather than solving it with a checkbook?
What can you do for short-term leases?
Short-term leases. In my ranch, the 6,000 acres that I have, I only own 1,400 of them. The rest is all leased, but I had to shuffle through landlords early on. Once they saw what we're doing, and I'll just be honest about it. I mean, there have been times I've fired landlords. You know, look at me. Obviously, I'm not addicted to work, right? So I treat every one of my landlords' fields, pastures, as better, if not better than I treat my own even. Okay? They all have new fences put around them at my expense. They all have water plumbed throughout all their properties at my expense. But most of my landlords have been with me for 20 plus years now. Average cropland rental rate where I'm at, Early County, is between $100 and $125 an acre. I have one small parcel. I pay that landlord $75 an acre because they're on a very fixed income. The rest of my landlords, the highest rate I pay is $55 an acre for cropland. Why? Because of all the money I stick into theirs. And they just want it taken care of. Every year we get calls from people who want us to rent their land. It's very rare now. We're too big the way it is. My son's got his hands full with 6,000 acres. Why? So once in a while, we'll take on a little more, but it's not often. But if we do, then they have to take a reduced rental rate. Yes.
There's a lot of corn silage chopped in the area. Can you walk through what you would do? Cover crop, interplant, whatever.
Yep, so what do we do for corn silage? And I talked about this a bit more in depth yesterday up at Cedarburg, is we're working with a lot of large dairies and corn silage and alfalfa. Where we start there is okay. We have to diversify the mix for a number of reasons. Instead of just corn silage, we're gonna start adding species like soybeans in long day bean in with the corn. But we're also going to take a part of those acres and seed a very diverse warm season mix. Brown midrib, sorghum sudan, cowpeas, pearl millet, plus a bunch of other species, but those will be the major components. Okay. Then, when you drive on there with that heavy equipment chopping off, you've got a living plant still growing, and you'll still be collecting sunlight even right after that's chopped. Okay? Also, and this is perhaps the most important, the beneficial effect to the animals themselves. The diverse diet, the array of phytochemicals, and that's what I'm going to get talking about after lunch. That is just critical to animal health. And I shared some data with the group yesterday. We're seeing over a 2,000 pound improvement to first lactations by going to this diverse mix and by growing and raising those replacement heifers out on pasture rather than a lot. So it's a combination, but you have to get diversity in there somewhere. Realize these large confinement operations, we don't expect anybody to go scrap that. They've got way too much money invested. But how do we work within their context to do as good as you can do in that situation? And the other thing is, it gets back to nutrient management. And so most of those, of course, have slurries. And of course, we're going to be recommending pumping those lagoons out over multiple times into a living cover crop. Okay, another mix that works really well for these dairies is cereal rye, winter triticale, forage winter wheat, hairy vetch, seeded in the fall after we chop off a crop, and then that can be either grazed or chopped the following spring. Then that in turn can be followed by a diverse warm season mix. So it's diversification. And you see a major response to soil health, nutrient cycling, all the processes. Yep. There, in back, I'm sorry.
How many your beef cows, how long you're leaving them on for about a week, you said roughly? And how many acres versus how many cows do you have out there?
Oh, so the animals during the winter months. So we leave the calves on the cows all winter. So typically in that group, there's going to be total cows and calves about 600 head, okay, in that group. How long we leave them is directly related to how much biomass is there. Okay, you got a pencil ready? I'll give you this if you want to write this down. This is the equation to figure biomass. Realize, in a seeded situation, you've got row spacing, okay, and I'm talking about with the drill, so you're at either from 6 to 12 inch, 10, 12 inch spacing. You're only going to get about 100 pounds of biomass per above ground inch. So if you have 20 inches of growth, you have approximately 2,000 pounds of forage there. Now you don't want to graze it all, you want to leave that armor, that residue, so you want to take about half. So in other words, you got 1,000 pounds per acre in this example. Now, class of livestock, a cow with a calf on it is going to eat, if you combine the two, about 4% of their body weight per day. Their total, okay? So, figure out the weight of your animals times 4%, that's how much feed you need per animal per day, and you just do the math. Plain and simple. Yep. Also, though, obviously in the winter it depends on snow. We can graze through about 30 inches of snow pretty easily. But what hurts is, like the last day of January this year, we had 1/3 of an inch of rain, which we were blessed to see, but now we got that ice, and that's hard on teeth if you're asking to gnaw through ice, you know. But that's how you figure it. So it's dependent on your biomass, the class of livestock, how much you want removed. But that'll get you close. Yes?
Such a variety of seed sizes in these mixes, is there ever any problem with separation?
With separation. So Not in Iowa, your fields are pretty small. You know, back home, we seed a quarter at a time. And even if a quarter, 160 acres, there's not gonna be much separation. We do have clients, though, who might wanna go out and seed 1,000 acres in a tank full. Well, then, we're gonna tell them, no, you better fill multiple times. Plus, remember, it's a cover crop. If it separates a little or something, who cares? You know, you won't notice it. It's rare that you'll see an issue from separation. Yeah. Yes?
Do you drill all your cover crops or do you broadcast
Yeah.
any of them?
The question, do I drill all my cover crops? We have to. If we are waiting that long for a rain, we're going to be waiting a long time. You just don't broadcast in our area. Your germination would be so poor. It just would rarely work. The only time I have had good success with it is when we're doing a late winter frost seeding of like a clover, and we can broadcast that onto the snow. But other than that, it's all drilled. Yeah.
You're planting all naked seed for the most part, you said. Well, you did say that.
Mhm.
Are you using anything with the Johnson Sioux biology?
Okay, the Johnson Sioux bioreactor. Dr. David Johnson and his wife Wei Chan developed a composting method. It's by far the best I've seen because Dr. Johnson is a molecular microbiologist. My head explodes. He's able to look at the biology and determine what specifically that biology does. And it's absolutely amazing. Google Johnson Sioux, and Sioux is S-U. And there's many of his presentations online. You can go to our website and under the resource material webinars, he's done a webinar for us. Look at that. What he found is that you add your materials, whatever that may be. You know, it could be leaves and wood chips and manure, whatever that is. And then you keep it moist. And then it's static. You've got to have air within a foot of it, so you're not going to do a huge pile of it. A lot of people use these empty shuttle totes, and you run some tubes down in it because you want air within everywhere of a foot. You keep it moist, and then you keep it static. In our environment, I found we should leave it about 2 years if it's outside. If you move it in for the winter, you can get it done in about a year. But what happens, he charts how the biology changes. And at the end of it, the appropriate time, it's got the right mix of biology. We have clients that will use that as a seed inoculant. They'll take it and then put it in an extractor and then inoculate the seed, just like you blow or put wet rhizobia inoculant on soybean seed. And you will, if your soils are degraded, you'll see a difference. Now, he sent me some early on. This is probably been about 7-8 years ago when he was first starting down this path. I did not see a difference in my soils, okay? But it is a way to jumpstart soils. You're adding biology to it. So anytime any of these things, if it will get you to where you want to go quicker and it's economical, okay. But just do a split trial so you know if it really works or not.